Hi, this is Steve Worona, and you're listening to Campus Public Safety Online from the National Center for Campus Public Safety. Today we're going to be talking about working with international students through SEVP, the Student and Exchange Visitor Program. And we're starting with several quick polling questions now on your screen. While you're responding to these questions, here's a brief orientation to the Adobe Connect interface we're using. On the left side of your screen, you'll see a box labeled Questions and Comments where you can read and type messages. And there's a tab labeled Everyone at the bottom of this box, and that's the tab you'll use for all of your general messages, including questions and comments for our speaker. We'll be breaking for discussion several times during the presentation, so please do not hold your questions to the end. You can also send direct messages to a specific person by hovering your cursor over a name in the attendee list. One of those names is Technical Help, and that's the place to go if you run into technical problems. We're also monitoring Twitter for your questions and comments. Use hashtag NCCPS webinar. That's NCCPS webinar. If you miss part of today's conversation, or if you want to see some or all of it again, this webinar is being recorded and captioned. The link will be available on the NCCPS webinars page in about a week, and watch your email for a link to a brief evaluation survey requesting your reactions and comments on today's session. Please take a minute to respond to that survey when the link arrives. We do appreciate your feedback. And now for today's presentation. SEVP is part of the National Security Investigations Division of ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, within the Department of Homeland Security. SEVP acts as a bridge for government organizations that have an interest in information on non-immigrants whose primary reason for coming to the United States is to be students. Our speaker is Kimberly Large, a field representative for SEVP, who will give us an overview of the program and tell us about the international student life cycle, ways campus law enforcement can incorporate international students into emergency preparedness, and a number of other related topics. Kimberly joined SEVP in 2014 and serves the Arizona Territory. Prior to joining SEVP, she worked for the University of Phoenix for nearly 12 years. She received her bachelor's degree in political science from Grand Canyon University, her MBA in international business from Western International University, and a master's degree in adult education and training from the University of Phoenix. Kimberly Large, welcome to Campus Public Safety Online.
Thank you so much, Steve. Thanks for having us. We're really excited to be here today. And as I was looking at some of those polls as we got this started, I'm really excited to see that there's a lot of new people that have never listened to an SEVP webinar in the past. So it's very exciting to get some of this information out to some new folks. So first of all, let's go over what we're going to cover today. I'm going to go over some basics of SEVP, which is the Student and Exchange Visitors Program. And then I'm also going to discuss SEVIS, which is our database. Then we'll get into some collaboration and emergency planning tools as well. So let's get started. First, we're going to cover the Student and Exchange Visitors Program basics. So let's first go over some key terms. First term that I want to talk to you about is the Principal Designated School Official and the Designated School Official. These are members of the school that have been approved by SEVP, or the Student and Exchange Visitors Program, to have direct access to SEVIS, which is our database. They are the primary contact for international students, both F1 and M1 students, and also the primary contact for us over here at SEVP. The main difference between the PDSO and the DSO is that the PDSO would also handle certification of the school and recertification of the school, which is a regulatory requirement every 2 years. Then we also have SEVIS, which is the Student and Exchange Visitor Information System. This was developed post 9/11, and it houses information for schools, DSOs, which we just previously discussed, and also students. There's quite a bit of information in there, and it goes back for many, many years now. We also have a couple of important forms that I'd like to discuss. The first one is the Form I-17. This is considered to be a living document. And this is how we consider the school to be operating. Whatever it has on there is what the school has told us they are offering as far as programs of study, their student population numbers, and their DSO information as well. There's quite a bit of information on there. They do have a requirement to report to us changes that happen within the school. Most of those changes have to be reported to us within 21 days. And then we have the Form I-20. A lot of people are very familiar with this form. This is the form that DSOs at the schools issue to the students. Both F and M students get this certificate or form. And that is what they're going to need in order to pay their I-901 fee. They apply for a visa using this form. They also need it when they enter the United States to show that they're entering as a student. They also need this form when they're going to apply for benefits. Let's say that they want to apply for employment with USCIS, or if they want to travel. The form is very important, and it's super important, as you'll hear throughout this webinar, that they keep it on them. So what is an F1 student? I've already mentioned F and M a couple of times. So an F1 student is primarily going to be an academic student. So that's going to be where you're thinking maybe your K through 12 students traditionally, or your college or university students, students going through degree programs, that type of thing. F1 students, they can apply for employment authorization during certain times of their academic program. And they're also admitted to the United States for what's called duration of status. So as long as they're maintaining their status and enrolled full-time and doing what they said they were coming to the United States to do, they're going to be allowed in the United States. So then we've got M1 students. These are primarily your vocational students. So a lot of our flight schools would be M1 students, cosmetology schools, dog grooming schools. There's really quite a variety of M1 schools across the nation. These students, some of the big differences would be that they are admitted to the United States for up to a year at a time, or for the duration of their program, which might actually be shorter than a year. If they need to stay longer than a year, they would have to apply and pay for an extension to stay. Let's move on. Now let's talk about the Student and Exchange Visitors Program. So with our mission, as you can see, we promote Homeland Security and public safety through the enforcement of federal laws. We do this by governing border control, customs, trade, and immigration regulations. Here you can see the umbrella under which we sit. So we've got SEVP is within the Department of Homeland Security, and then under Homeland Security you have ICE, and then a few steps down you can see us down there, the Student and Exchange Visitors Program. All right, so let's talk about SEVP. First of all, we were established in 2003, and I also think it's important to note that we are 100% fee funded. You'll hear me talk a little bit about the I-901 fee. That is the fee that all students have to pay in order to be an international student in the United States, and it helps fund the program. It's important to note that we administratively enforce the rules and the regulations, and that we also develop policy for SEVP certified schools and students. Another really important part is our outreach, and that's something that, right now, that's what we're doing. We're, reaching out to you guys, other stakeholders. Also, Steve mentioned that I'm a field representative, and as a field representative, that's kind of part of my main job function, is to actually go out to schools and sit down with the DSOs and ensure that they know the rules, the regulations, policies, any changes that might be happening in the international student community. So it really takes a variety of job functions to keep our program going. So, SEVIS. SEVIS, as I said, is a database. It houses information on the students, schools. Users include a lot of government officials, such as myself. However, the majority of our users are going to be those PDSOs and DSOs at your schools. It is also the database where the I-20 is issued from. And it's also where our DSOs handle all their reporting responsibilities. Oftentimes, or most of the reporting has to be done within 21 days. And that even includes during times of disaster. So it's really important that DSOs are staying in touch during emergency planning. Some areas that need to be updated frequently would be student addresses, program changes, if a student falls below a full course of study, that type of thing. So compliance and enforcement. We monitor schools for red flags. Some of those red flags might be if a school's population is all international students, that potentially is a red flag. Or maybe all their international students are involved in training programs. Also, potentially something we might just want to look a little bit farther into. We have developed additional tools to crack down on fraud. We have some internal tools that our school certification uses to do a risk assessment on certified schools. We also do what's called a site visit. And so sometimes we're going to pop into a school and just ask a few questions, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they're under investigation, but it's just our way of just double checking our own work as well. All right, and I think we might be ready for some questions. What do you think, Steve?
That's what we'll do now. Thanks, Kimberly. You are listening to Campus Public Safety Online. Today we're talking about the Student and Exchange Visitor program with Kimberly Large. We will be stopping for questions several times, so don't hold your questions. Type them into that chat space. Kimberly, what is the difference between a Form I-20 and a visa, and how do either of those reflect a student's status?
So, yeah, that's a great question, Steve. The Form I-20 is the document issued by the DSO at the school. And as I said, you know, I'm part of Department of Homeland Security, so that would be a form out of the Department of Homeland Security. They're going to take that form with them to their local consulate and set up a visa interview. The visa is actually issued by the Department of State, so that's a completely separate document. And they're going to sit with that interview, and basically what the visa does, it's a foil stamp that goes inside the passport. And what the visa does is it gets them on an airplane to our front door. And interestingly enough, a visa does not guarantee entry to the United States. All it does is get them on that airplane, knocking on our front door. And then when they get to our front door, or Customs and Border Protection, that's where they're going to ask for permission to enter the United States. And then they're actually given a completely different form called the I-94, which says how long they can stay in the United States.
Thanks. What does it mean to maintain status?
So maintaining status, students have to follow the rules and the regulations dependent on their visa type. So whether it be an F or an M, there are different regulations. But they have to maintain a full course of study. There are occasions when possibly they might have to drop below a full course. One might be like a medical condition. In that case, they do have to get authorization and documentation from their doctor, and they have to present that information to their DSO at their school before they drop below that full course of study. So that's a big one, is maintaining full course of study. Also, no unauthorized employment. We need to remember that students are coming to be students, not necessarily employees right off the bat. So that's something else. Maintaining status is making sure that they know the rules that they're supposed to be abiding by.
Thanks, Kimberly. Rebecca Rodriguez-Mead wonders, what is the most common error you find when conducting a risk assessment at a school?
You know what? I wish I could give you an answer on that one, but that is actually in our school certification area. And like I said, I'm a field representative, so I don't have that data on me.
Okay, thanks. Justin wonders, a lot of students approach our housing office claiming, quote, I am international, so I need to live on campus, unquote. Can you discuss the F1 visa terms and how much consideration or priority should be considered in housing international students?
Wow, that's a really good question. You know, we don't actually have anything in our regulations that governs the housing situations for F1 students, and that includes both K through 12 students and post-secondary. So it would really be an institutional policy that they might want to create as to how much housing they're setting aside for their international students.
Okay, Kimberly, I'll let you get back to your presentation.
All right, wonderful. Thanks, Steve. All right, now we're going to discuss SEVIS by the numbers. So it's going to be a lot of data here, guys. All right, so SEVIS by the numbers. It's an annual report that we publish. It is released and put on ice.gov/SEVP. It has a ton of information about SEVP certified schools and the international students and trends that are going on in the United States. It's a really, really fun thing to click around in and take a look at annually, just so that you kind of have an idea of what's going on with the international student population in the United States. So let's take a look at a couple of the different numbers. Currently, we have a little over 1.1 million international students in the United States. That's going to be F1 and M1 students that we're talking about there. That doesn't include their dependents, so let's remember some people are married or have children that they bring with them to the United States, and all their information is in SEVIS as well. Not to mention, this is our current number of students, so think, 10 years ago, and all those students and dependents, all that information is housed in SEVIS. Currently, we have a little over 8,300 schools that are certified with SEVP, and like I said earlier, they do go through a 2-year recertification period, and at that point in time, we review their Form I-17 line by line. It's a lot of tedious work that our adjudicators go through to ensure that our schools are doing what they say that they're going to do and are following the rules as well. So also something I like to point out here is international students have contributed over $42 billion to the U.S. economy in 2017. That's huge when you think about the benefits that they are providing to our economy. Now this next slide here, this is my favorite one. I've shared this statistic with probably all 365 schools in the state of Arizona where I work. Because when we think of international students, a lot of times we think of those giant state schools that have, hundreds or thousands of international students. But in reality, 77% of SEVP certified schools have fewer than 50 international students. What I think is so awesome about this is the PDSOs and DSOs at schools should be recognized for all the hard work that they do, because they may not be handling international student data on a daily basis, because they might also be the registrar and the English teacher. And so they wear a lot of hats. This next slide is just showing the top 10 countries that send students to the United States. As you can see, a majority of them are Asian students, but if you take a look between India and South Korea, so spots number 2 and 3, look at the drop in numbers there. So China and India really send the most students to the U.S. All right, so now we're going to talk about some of our collaboration with other government partners. So as I said, I'm with DHS, or SEVP is with DHS, and underneath DHS we also have Customs and Border Protection, USCIS, and then ICE, which is who I am, who I'm with. So Homeland Security has quite a big umbrella. But then we also work with, say, Department of State, so Consular Affairs or Education USA, if you've heard of them. Other government agencies, and things to point out would be like Social Security and Department of Motor Vehicles, because international students, if they do end up getting a job, would need to work with Social Security, and they are authorized to drive in most states, so there are benefits that they have as well. So let me talk a little bit about a couple of our outreach programs. The first one is Project Campus Sentinel. This one is where Homeland Security Investigations agent goes out to school to really improve and promote communication between the schools, DSOs, and the agents in the field. They usually like to meet with the DSOs and with campus security. And the purpose of this program is to prevent SEVIS exploitation and, like I said, improve communications. Oftentimes, they will go out with a field representative, so let's say that's me, and we'll do kind of what's called a joint visit, where we're going to sit down and we're going to talk with the DSOs and the campus security about what they can do to be mindful of international students on campus. The next program is Project Shield America, and this one is where Homeland Security agents go out and they talk to schools, usually not the DSOs, usually it's going to be their export control officer, because this program is meant to protect controlled technology and sensitive research and intellectual property that takes place at schools. A good example would be maybe going out to a flight school that's positioned near a military base. Students are training to be pilots. We want to make sure that they're not flying over the military bases and taking any pictures of things that they shouldn't be. Now, what I would like to do is take a quick poll break, because I just want to know a little bit more about our audience. If you don't mind, let me know what your role is and if you've got an operations plan in place, and have you thought about those international students? So it looks like we've got a really good mix of people tuning in. Some school officials, law enforcement, excellent. Really great to see that most of you have an emergency operation plan in place. And we've got a good mix of including those international students, or maybe we need to get together as a team on campus and find out if we have. So thanks for contributing to that. I really appreciate it. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about campus emergency planning. Some questions that you really should consider before an emergency takes place. We've got a few here on the screen. Hopefully you've thought about some of these before. Some other things to think about are when you have orientation for international students. Many schools do that. They do an international orientation before school starts. Does your orientation involve local law enforcement? That might be something that you might want to consider having there. the benefits of having them right there at the beginning of the school year and introducing students to local law enforcement is to show them that we are here to help. There's often a different cultural idea on how law enforcement treats the general public or students, and so it's always nice to let them know that law enforcement is here to help. Something else to consider is, do the schools have translations as part of their alert system? If everything's coming through in English, but you have a majority of your students on campus are, let's say, Mandarin speakers, are they going to understand terms like hurricane, tornado, active shooter, things like that? So it's important to maybe have some translations. Also, what alerts are in place for those who don't use social media? We oftentimes hear about things on Messenger or Facebook or Instagram, but maybe there's some kids that don't have social media out there. So how are we letting them know that there's an emergency situation? Another one, Wi-Fi. A lot of international students don't use cell data. They only use Wi-Fi, so we need to be cognizant of that. And then really important from my point of view is we do have reporting requirements there for DSOs, and are your DSOs able to report on these international students even in the case of an emergency? All right, so emergency planning. Generally, or not generally, but oftentimes international students are just grouped into an emergency plan. But I really want you to think, is that the best course of action? Because of all those things that we just discussed, there are certain considerations that need to be taken into consideration. I was at Arizona K-12 school. This was probably about a year ago. I showed up for a routine sit-down information meeting with the school. I walked into the office and they said, oh my gosh, what are you doing here? We're going into a lockdown. So I was thrown into the principal's office and had to do a lockdown. But I do wonder if they, in fact, have gone over what a lockdown means with their international students, because maybe that's not something that they would traditionally do in Kenya or their home country. So those are things to think about so that they don't cause any panic. Other things to think about are the documents that international students need to keep with them. Earlier we discussed the visa and the passport and the Form I-20. Again, those are all super important that those students have those on them, especially if they're displaced. That shows that they're in the United States in a student status. And then of course, we're going back to the reporting from DSOs. I probably can't say that enough. It's really important that DSOs are in communication with SEVP during emergency situations, and they should keep accounts on their international students and make sure that they're all accounted for, whether it be a natural or man-made disaster. All right, so this kind of expands on some of the things that we were discussing earlier. We need to take into some special considerations for our international students, right? So we want to take some preemptive measures so that we're ready in case of an international or an emergency. So we want to make sure that you're canvassing your students and finding out how they communicate. Are they using WhatsApp? Are they using Messenger? Are they using WeChat? You really want to make sure that you're able to reach out to all of your students in any type of situation. Then of course we have language barriers. As I previously mentioned, you might want to consider having your emergency messages translated into a couple of different languages. You could even, preemptively write up some messaging so that it's ready to go out in multiple languages. Also, campus security, use those DSOs on campus to get that message out to the international students. That should all be part of your emergency plan. Cultural perceptions of law enforcement. I touched on this just a little bit earlier, but we really want to make sure that international students know we are here to help. I've got a great situation, not great situation, but it all ended up great in the end. But there was a car full of students that were from an Asian country, and they were getting pulled over, and they did not realize that they were supposed to pull over, so they just kept driving. It was a cultural difference in perception of law enforcement, and it ended up being, you know, what we might call a low-speed, high-speed chase. Everything ended up fine in the end. It was no big deal, but that's something that you want to make sure you communicate with your international students, that the police are here to help, and we really want to listen to what their message is. For campus-based international students, this kind of goes back to one of those questions from our last question period. We want to make sure that they know what the common dangers are in the area where they're living. For example, I am from Arizona. If you told me a tornado was coming, I would not know what to do. So you want to make sure that they understand the common dangers and what to do in those types of situations. So let's talk about some questions to consider during an emergency and after. Can they maintain status? We talked a little bit about that and what they need to do to maintain status. So let's say the school floods and it's going to have to shut down for the remainder of the term. It's not going to be able to be open. The student is going to need to do something because they, by law, are required to be enrolled in school full-time while they're here in F1 status or M1. So they need to consider, are they going to return home? Are they going to transfer to another school? How are they going to maintain their status during this emergency situation? Let's say there's a storm and there's some damage, but it looks like the school is going to be able to reopen within a week, let's say. Now, if the student is able to still meet all attendance requirements and finish out the semester successfully, then that's not going to require that they return home or transfer. So those types of situations would be more handled on a case-by-case basis. Campus security and school administration and DSOs should really work together. Like I said earlier, we do need certain reporting done during emergency situations. It's important to remember that you need to have access to your international student files. If a student does need to transfer, the DSO is going to need to have access to SEVIS, which is going to require the internet, that type of thing. Schools can contact SEVP in an emergency situation to kind of update us on maybe, oh, we anticipate the school being closed for a week, or we don't even know at this point in time, but we'll get back to you, SEVP. It's real important to stay in communication. And at the end of this presentation, I'll actually give an email address and a phone number of where DSOs can call. All right, so working with non-immigrant students. I really encourage law enforcement personnel that are on the call or on the webinar to work with your DSOs. What is your relationship like right now? Do you even know who your DSOs are on campus? Really use them as a tool when you're building your emergency plans. DSOs are, or per federal requirements, schools are required to have a PDSO assigned to every campus. However, I know from doing my visits, there may not be someone on campus at all times. So that's something that schools should really consider the point of contact for Homeland Security and for the international students is the DSO. So is the DSO available if there's a disaster? It's real important to have a point of contact on campus for the students. So when we're talking about disasters, like I said, we might be talking about natural, we might be talking about man-made, but we need to remember that you're obligated to continue to provide services during an emergency. So what that means is reporting to us, keeping track of your international students, having a plan in place to access your SEVIS records if you're unable to access them from your normal office situation, those types of things. Also want to make sure that you're communicating to your international students in case of emergency. What if they have to evacuate? What do they need to grab? Well, they're going to need to grab their passport. They're going to need to grab their I-20, their visa. They should tell their DSO that, hey, I'm being evacuated. This is where I'm going. I'm going to drive to my aunt's house in Georgia. Whatever it might be, they need to make sure that they're staying in contact with their DSO at all times. So as you can see here, we've listed some potential scenarios. We're all too familiar with these types of things. But what I can tell you is Hurricane Katrina really taught SEVP a lesson. And we developed communication plans after Hurricane Katrina that we were able to send out to schools in emergency situations. Most recently, there was a lot of flooding in the Midwest, and through the field representatives that's located there and us over here at headquarters, we were able to get out some information to the DSOs in that area timely. So let's talk about some resources. One of my favorite ones, and this could not be better timed, is the campus resilience documents we have on dhs.gov. Really great resources. Just on Sunday, they released some more starter kits. So for higher education, we have improvised explosive devices, tornadoes, hazardous materials, earthquakes, cyber breaches, hurricanes, and active shooters. These are all starter kits that include tools for your schools and what to do, how to prepare, what to do afterwards, just really good training that DHS has provided. We also have specific starter kits for K through 12 schools. They are active shooter kits, and they are broken down for elementary, junior high, and high school levels. So really good information out there. Also, we have information on Study in the States. I always like to plug that because that's an SEVP resource, and I give the people over here in our communications team a lot of credit for developing as many materials as they do to send out to our schools and students when they're impacted by a disaster. You can also find blog posts on Study in the States, and we do publish a newsletter that has also highlighted campus emergency planning as well as a topic. Additional resources, we have FEMA. FEMA's great. I actually volunteered with FEMA for a little over a month during Hurricane Harvey, and just the amount of resources that FEMA provides to individuals that have been struck during a disaster, it's pretty amazing. They additionally have different plans for various situations. And if you check them out, they've got a section in there called A Closer Look at Incorporating International Students into Higher Education Emergency Management and Planning. Really great tool for our higher education schools out there. And I think we might be ready for some more questions.
Thanks, Kimberly, and keep those questions coming in. We've got another break after this one. Alex Staten wonders, he's referring to slide 18 where it said that 1,724 schools had 0 active international students. So Alex says, this seems like a large number, 1724, of schools with SEVP certification with 0 active international students. Would you talk more about why you think that is?
Well, this, enrolling students is optional. I can tell you, I can give you just kind of an example in the state of Arizona. I have one public school district that they're certified, they like being certified, they don't go out looking for international students. They maintain their certification in case a student has an aunt or uncle that lives in the district, and so they want to be able to provide the education to people in the area, like to bring in a child, but they're not out looking for students necessarily. They're not recruiting them.
Before you were talking about Katrina, Alex also asked, after a catastrophic event such as Hurricane Katrina, where a school cannot recover soon enough for students to remain in compliance, does the school lose SEVP certification?
Well, it's all going back to what I've kind of been hounding on this whole time, and that is that they need to properly report. So I can't say specifically, in a general term that the school is going to lose SEVP certification, but they do need to stay up on their reporting, and they do need to communicate with their students what their options are and help their students should they need to transfer or return home. You should probably discuss those options with students ahead of time, preemptively, to say, okay, if something does happen, what's your next plan of action?
Kimberly, are there visa implications regarding reduced credit or withdrawals from academic programs, or any exceptions for health or trauma issues?
So great question. We touched on this just a little bit earlier, and that's something that's called reduced course load. For an F1 student, there are 3 reasons why they might be able to reduce their course load. One would be medical, and they're allowed up to 12 months of medical reduced course load. But as I said earlier, they do have to have proper documentation to show that they are unable to maintain a full course of study before they drop out of their classes. Another reason might be that they're having some academic difficulties. This is usually going to happen in the first term, like maybe where they're coming from, the school system is just so drastically different from the American school system that maybe they're just struggling a little bit and need to drop down. They can't drop totally out, but they can go down to, they can reduce their number of credits that they're taking. The other situation, which frequently happens, is in their final term. So let's say the student is coming in, this is going to be their last semester at the school, and they only need 9 credits, let's say, to graduate, whereas normally full-time would be 12. That would be an acceptable situation as well.
Neil wonders, is there training available for individuals that are not associated with the university, specifically on the student visa requirements?
So for individuals that are not associated with the university, let's see, I'm trying to think of, yeah, there's probably, I mean, we've got resources by the bazillions out there, but Study in the States has a ton of information. There's webinars on there that are open to the public and they're free. So there's that type of training that we provide. And I'll go over that actually in the next couple of slides as well. But then also visa-specific requirements, that's really more Department of State, and I don't know their training opportunities, but I would encourage them to reach out to their contacts there.
Let me squeeze in one more question during this break, but remember we've got another one coming, so keep those questions coming. Are international students allowed to transfer schools?
Yes. So great question, and that's gonna depend on if they're an F student or an M student. So M students are a little more restricted on their transfers. They are allowed to, but they cannot change their program of study, and it has to be within 6 months of entering the United States. So let's say I've got a student that comes in to train to become a pilot on an M1 visa. And he gets here and he says, you know what, I actually want to be a hairdresser. I've just realized that that's actually my calling, which would also be an M1 visa school. However, he can't transfer from a pilot program to a cosmetology program. He's going to have to exit the country and come back in for that. Whereas an F1 student, let's say that they come and they decide that they want to be, they're going to pursue a bachelor's in biology, and they get here and they don't like going to whatever ABC school it is that they originally started attending, and they want to be closer to some family and warm weather over in Arizona. So they're going to transfer from the East Coast to the West. And in that process, they're also going to become an economics major. That's totally allowed for an F1 student. So different regulations on those two, but it is allowable.
Thanks, Kimberly. In the home stretch, I'll let you get back to your presentation.
All right, thanks, Steve. All right, so let's talk about some resources here. As I just mentioned, we've got Study in the States. It's studyinthestates.dhs.gov. This is an excellent resource for the general public, for students, for families, for schools. The content is translated into 90 different languages. We also have different tools on there, which we'll go into a couple of those in a second here, but it also has a section that's called a Help Hub, and in that Help Hub are user guides that will walk DSOs through step-by-step guidance on how to do certain actions, like, for example, registering students in SEVIS, or how to reduce course load into SEVIS, which was something that we just talked about in that last break. So really great resource, and it's always being updated as well. Now within Study in the States, you can find our resource library. This is so cool. It has a ton of different one-pagers in there. You can print them off in either color or grayscale, but they're going to have all different kinds of infographics. You've got information on record keeping and reporting, which is something we've talked a lot about during this webinar. We also have the student life cycle, which, for those of you that are not with an academic institution, you might want to check out these student life cycles to just get an idea of what students go through, not only while they're here, but in preparation to coming to the United States to study as well. So really, really great resource as well. We talked about webinars. I told you that we've got those on Study in the States. Really, really great. We do live webinars where we do allow for live question and answer session. We also have Government Voices webinars where we collaborate with, say, SEVP or USCIS. And like I said earlier, these are free and open to the general public, so check them out. Now, this is information on how you can, or how we can engage with you. I'd like to thank Steve for having us join you guys today. If you would like a webinar, or if you would like an in-person presentation by maybe the local field representative, this is how you're going to request a conference through SEVP. It's up there on the right with that /conferences. But again, you're going to go to Study in the States to request that. You can also follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and that's another way that we get a lot of information out to our public as well. And finally, I was telling you earlier that I was going to give you an email address and phone numbers. This is it right here, folks. You're going to want to save that SEVP@ice.dhs.gov for any future questions. Great group of people there, pretty quick to respond. They're also the ones that answer our phones, and you've got two phone numbers there. You can use that 800 892-4829 to get in touch with us if you have any additional questions after this webinar. All right, Steve, I think we're coming up to our final Q&A. What do you think?
Absolutely, and we've got some questions, and keep typing them in. We need as many as we can get. If the internet is out during an emergency and a DSO needs to report a material change in the student in SEVIS, what steps do they need to follow?
Oh, perfect timing on this question, Steve. You know who they're going to contact? They're going to contact the SEVP Response Center. We commonly refer to it as the SRC, and that's the information that I just gave you on the last slide. So that 800 number, or well, I guess if the internet's out, I guess they're not emailing, are they? So they're gonna call that 800-892-4829 or 703-603-3400.
A question that came in during the registration process. Here's how it read. How do universities have to assist government with verifying, quote, international students, unquote, are actively enrolled and on campus? And since that question came in really before your presentation, perhaps expand upon the requirements that a university has for dealing with government and verifying student status.
Sure. So really, DSOs, when they are certified and approved by SEVP, they have agreed that they will report to us. For example, one of the reporting requirements is that they register their students in SEVIS within 30 days of their start date. So they're required to actually log into the system and say, yes, the student is here and they're doing what they said they were going to do. They are attending school. They also, when they are approved, they agree that they are going to follow all the regulations that pertain to F&M students. So things like reporting an address change or reporting a change in the student's program of study. They've said that they will report this to us, and we do hold them to that. And like I said early on in the presentation, most of the reporting is required to be done within 21 days.
Erin Reed says, June 4th, the policy guideline regarding recruiters was sent out. If we are working with a recruiter or agent and a student signs a release that we can send I-20s to the recruiter or agent, can we do so?
You know, I'm going to really encourage Erin to read that policy guidance. It does state that I-20s should not be sent to agents, and there's a lot of privacy concerns with that. So the guidance is published on ice.gov, and if she has additional questions about it, she should reach out to her field representative or to SEVP.
Another question that came in during registration that I don't think you've touched on, the relationship between medical marijuana and how it relates to international student safety in regards to the law, state versus federal law. The writer said, I know for recreational marijuana, students are subject to federal law regardless of the state they are studying. However, what if a student is prescribed medical marijuana?
Fantastic question, and you know what, I'm going to take you back to another story out of Arizona. I was doing one of those Project Campus Sentinel visits with our local special agent, and this exact question came up. And it just so happens that he had just found out himself that in the state of Arizona, so this might be different state by state, but in the state of Arizona, you can only be given what they call a green card, which is really funny when you're talking to people that deal with immigration as well, because we consider green cards to be something else. But anyway, a green card in the state of Arizona, you have to be a citizen or maybe even a legal permanent resident, but you can't be an international student and be prescribed marijuana in the state. So if a student is saying that they have a medical card, in Arizona at least, they probably don't. So it's really going to be, you know, on a case by case, and I can't speak overall nationwide to that question.
When are DSOs expected to notify their local Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, or Homeland Security Investigations, HSI, special agents during an emergency? Is there an emergency protocol we can access?
So that's going to be one that would be more of a case-by-case situation, because let's say that there's a hurricane. That they're probably not going to reach out to their special agents during that time unless they see reason to. That's when they're going to really reach out to SEVP to help keep track of their students. But if there's something like an active shooter, if the active shooter is actually an international student, I would advise them to reach out to their local special agent to loop them in on that situation. Of course, the local law enforcement is always going to be the first one that they're going to want to reach out to, though.
Does SEVP have any guidelines or suggestions for how DSOs can communicate during an emergency with international students who do not possess a United States phone number or who only use Wi-Fi?
So as we've kind of discussed a little bit, definitely make sure that you include that in your emergency campus planning. Make sure that you've included backup communication methods, maybe communicating with faculty or host families or even families back home, that type of thing. So yeah, include that into your emergency campus planning.
Here's an open-ended question. What can school officials do to be prepared?
Oh goodness, prepared to go to the grocery store, Steve? Or no, I'm just kidding.
Anything that you want to talk about in about a minute or so.
Okay, all right. Let's see. They can be prepared by talking to school officials. Should be prepared. They should know who the campus law enforcement is. They may even want to familiarize themselves with local public law enforcement. They want to create a communications protocol. They definitely want to talk to their students ahead of time. That's just so important, especially when we're dealing with those cultural and language barriers that will exist, especially heavy in an emergency situation. They want to make sure that the students are prepared. They might even consider talking to their students to maybe register with their embassy, so that their embassy knows that they're here in the United States studying, and if there is a disaster, their embassy might be able to reach out to them as well. So there's certainly a huge variety of things. And then, of course, Steve, if they're going to the grocery store, they should be taking a list with them.
Thanks very much, Kimberly, and thanks to all of our viewers and questioners from around the Internet. Check the NCCPS webinars page in the next week or so for a link to the captioned recording of today's presentation, as well as a link to our speaker slides. The brief evaluation survey I mentioned earlier should already be in your mailbox. It will take you no more than 2 minutes to complete. Please do. We read and act on your comments. Our next Campus Public Safety Online webinar will be on the topic of Title IX, and it will take place in August. Keep your eye on the National Center webpage at nccpsafety.org. That's nccpsafety.org for details. And be sure to take note of the annual Legal Issues in Higher Education Conference, sponsored by one of our partner organizations, the University of Vermont. The conference features leading experts in higher education, law, student affairs, and campus public safety. The conference spans 2.5 days from October 14th to 16th, and you can attend in person or online. Campus Public Safety Online is brought to you by the National Center for Campus Public Safety with support from the University of Vermont Continuing and Distance Education and the U.S. Department of Justice. Special thanks today to Andrea Young and Dan Cardella. This is Steve Worona. See you in August on Campus Public Safety Online.